As we continue our offseason recap, we look at LA Kings forward Viktor Arvidsson after a bounce-back season. Will the Kings look to trade him to solidify other areas of need? That's next in this edition of Locked on LA Kings.
You are Locked on Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked on LA Kings, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked on LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. At last check, we were at 1,781 subscribers on a streak of 7 straight months with over 100 more subscribers per month as we head towards 2,000. Now, I will have to say, unless we get 30 more subscribers by Thursday, it looks like that streak will come to an end. If you haven't subscribed yet and you want to keep that streak going, please subscribe. If not, it's been a great run. Thank you to all who have liked and subscribed at this point. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked on LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 16 seasons, and a passionate LA Kings fan for 30 years. Hope you're enjoying your Memorial Day weekend and taking a moment to remember those that paid the ultimate price for us so that we could enjoy the lives that we have. If you're watching on YouTube, you probably have noticed we have a bit of a different look. It's not a big change, but a few tweaks to make things look a little cleaner. We've got a little rundown on the side so you can see what's coming up. Hope that you like it. Coming up on this episode of Locked on LA Kings, we talk about a potential goalie trade for the Kings. We'll wrap up how the Kings players participating in the World Championships did in that event as it concluded over the weekend. And we'll update you on a Kings injury, or so I thought. Plus, we'll talk about the potential of the Kings playing a game south of the border. But we begin with a look at a player whose name has come up in potential trade rumors recently and focus on LA Kings forward Viktor Arvidsson. Arvi just wrapped up his second season in LA with a solid year. He was fourth on the team in points with 59, third in goals with 26, and fifth in assists with 33. He was also second on the team in power play goals with 10, second only to the 11 scored by Adrian Kempe. Arvidsson has proven to be a reliable and dangerous weapon offensively for the Kings, both 5-on-5 and on the power play. Let's hear from Viktor Arvidsson from this past season and to talk about his future as he spoke the day after the Kings season ended in the LA Kings exit interviews. I'll be paraphrasing the questions and answers to streamline things a bit. If you want to check out the entire exit interview, you can go to YouTube, just search Viktor Arvidsson exit interview, and it will be the first thing that pops up. And thanks to the LA Kings YouTube channel for posting all of the exit interviews. In that video, Arvidsson shares the mic with fellow Kings forward Alex Iafallo, who will focus on in a future show. The first question that Arvidsson was asked was about missing the playoffs last season due to injury and getting to participate in the playoffs this season for the first time as an LA King. He said that he thought it went well, that he tried to be a difference maker, and it was really fun to be a part of playoff hockey again. I mentioned Arvidsson's numbers in the regular season, but he put up numbers in the postseason this year as well in that 6-game series against the Oilers. 7 points in 6 games, tied with Andrei Kopitar for second on the team. Now, he had just 1 goal, but 6 assists to lead the Kings in helpers in the playoffs. And 5 of those assists came on the power play, more than double any other player the Kings had. So Viktor Arvidsson had a big hand in why the Kings power play was so good this postseason. He was asked about how tough last offseason was, having to miss the playoffs and then having back surgery and then having to rehab that injury. He said he didn't have any expectations coming into this year. He just wanted to have a full, healthy season. Said he's excited about the offseason and to be able to train the way he wants to get ready for next year. That's something I think as fans we probably don't take into account enough. Offseason routine for players and how they go about that, especially coming off an injury. That routine is obviously disrupted. But credit to Viktor Arvidsson. He had to come back, rehab, and had a very, very good bounce-back season for the LA Kings. But hopefully we'll be even better next season, having that routine and being healthy and getting ready to go. Arvidsson was asked about being a part of a championship caliber team in Nashville that made it to a Stanley Cup final and was asked based on his experience if he felt the Kings were approaching being that kind of a team. He said the Kings still need some more experience, but he thinks the Kings are headed there. He says they have the veterans, the team, and the management to do it, but he did say it is hard to win in this league and pointed out that Edmonton will be a team they're going to have to contend with likely for years to come. Arvidsson has played in 67 career playoff games. That's third most on the team as far as players who are expected back next season, only to Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty. So something to consider when you talk about a possible trade of Viktor Arvidsson. You want to be a playoff team. You want to have a deep run in the playoffs. It helps you to have players who have been there, done that, and have had playoff experience. And Viktor Arvidsson certainly has had that. Arvidsson was asked about going into next season if this is the last year of his contract this coming season, and he was asked if he would like to have a new contract in place before the season. He said it was not something he was focusing on, just wanted to stay healthy and get his game back and see what happens, and he just wants to continue to get better. So the party line from Viktor Arvidsson, most players say that kind of thing. They're not going to want to negotiate in the media. They're not going to want to come out and say something controversial, even though we know deep down, of course, he wants another contract for next season. But that's something to consider, his contract status, when we talk about him being potentially traded. And we'll get into that more in just a second. Arvidsson was asked if he felt like he was back as far as his career being on track after the offseason back surgery. He said he thought so. He said he felt like he had a lot of good energy this postseason. He liked that he was playing a more gritty style, and that he was focusing on trying to bring energy to the lineup. He says getting to play in playoff hockey was a big deal for him, and that he hopes that he can build off that towards next season. It was a very solid season for Viktor Arvidsson. We told you the numbers, but as he said, unlike last season, it did seem like he was more of a spark this season. He showed the ability to be able to create his own shot at times, to be able to get good scoring chances. He has an above average NHL shot. He can definitely set up teammates, so a good, well-rounded offensive player. Yes, he is undersized, but never shows a lack of effort or grit in battling for pucks against bigger players in the corners. Not afraid to go to the net. I really like Viktor Arvidsson a lot, and based on the comments that you have made in our fan feedback shows and in our YouTube channels, you like him a lot too. It seems that not a lot of Kings fans are all that excited about the potential rumors of a Viktor Arvidsson being traded to create some more cap space to be able to re-sign a player like Vladislav Gavrikov. And the reason Arvidsson's name is coming up, we talked about this in an earlier episode, but I know a lot of people like to say, well, what about Sean Walker and Sean Durzi? Can't we trade those guys instead of a Viktor Arvidsson? Well, you can. And as far as the salary cap relief, which is something the Kings are looking for, it would be similar. Arvidsson's scheduled to make $4.25 million on the final year of his contract next year, while Durzi and Walker combined make $4.35 million. But the problem is that unlike Sean Walker and Sean Durzi, Viktor Arvidsson is a top six forward who is going to be sought after. And as a result, the Kings are not just looking to trade a player like him just to create cap space, but also to get the best return they can as well. You're going to get a lot better return for a guy like Viktor Arvidsson than you are for a combo of Sean Durzi and Sean Walker. And don't forget that Arvidsson, along with Anze Kopitar and Matt Roy, all will be unrestricted free agents after this coming season. So that plays a factor as well. Do the Kings feel like they'll be able to re-sign Viktor Arvidsson? If not, will they be looking to move him before the end of the season to make sure he doesn't walk into free agency and they have nothing in return? And if you're going to do that, you'd rather do that before the season starts or early in the season, because once you get into a playoff chase where the Kings are expected to be, you don't want to remove a key member of your team and mess with the chemistry of the team. So if there were to be a Viktor Arvidsson trade, I would expect to see that either before the draft, certainly in the offseason, or early in the regular season. But there's a lot of moving parts here. Obviously, what could they get in return? What they do get in salary cap relief, is that enough to be able to re-sign a guy like a Vladislav Gavrikov? And if they can re-sign Viktor Arvidsson, how is that going to affect things going forward? Like we said, with Anze Kopitar and Matt Roy being UFAs as well at the end of the season. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but that's part of the reason why Viktor Arvidsson, even though he is a valuable piece for the LA Kings, why his name has come up in potential trade rumors. So we'll see how it plays out. Either way, I'm a fan of Viktor Arvidsson. I love what he's done for the Kings in his brief time in LA. Hopefully that can continue going forward. But as we've talked about, and as we've had some guests on the show talk about, some tough decisions may have to be made for the LA Kings this offseason, and trading of Viktor Arvidsson could be one of those tough decisions GM Rob Blake has to make. Speaking of a potential trade, is there a chance the Kings could be making a deal with the Flyers for a goalie for next season? We'll discuss that in a moment, but I need to let you know today's episode of Locked on LA Kings is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure that there is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure that every part fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check mark to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop at eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. The NHL draft is just over a month away, 30 days to be exact from today. And although the Kings do not have a first-round pick this season due to the trade deadline acquisitions with the Columbus Blue Jackets, it is not uncommon for trades to take place ahead of the draft. Plus, with the Kings potentially needing a goalie, any rumors involving goalies should get the attention of the LA Kings. With that in mind, the Philadelphia Flyers are finally in a full rebuild and have just hired a new general manager and former Flyer, Danny Briere, who recently said that Philadelphia goalie Carter Hart could be available, saying, quote, "I'm not in a position to turn down anything. I have to listen," end quote, if teams were to show interest. Now, would the Flyers be interested in shipping Carter Hart off to LA? Would they be willing to take on Cal Peterson? Would the Kings be interested in Carter Hart? Well, let's start with the last question first. Would the Kings be interested in Carter Hart? I would have to say yes, especially if it meant being able to get rid of Cal Peterson. Now, when you compare the two goalies, a lot of their key numbers are actually extremely similar. Hart is a career 500 goalie, a record of 84, 84, and 26. Cal Peterson is 2 games over 500 for his career, 44, 42, and 10. Cal has a slight edge in goals against average, 292 to Hart's 296. The save percentage goes to Hart by the slimmest of margins, 906 to 905. However, Hart is 24 years old while Cal is 28, and Hart has 100 more starts than Cal in his NHL career, 201 to 101. Plus, Hart has played for some pretty bad teams in Philadelphia, making the playoffs just once in his 5 years. So the Kings would be getting a more experienced, younger goalie who could blossom with a better team in front of him. Plus, Hart has 1 year left on his contract that pays him $3.9 million, while Cal has 2 years left at $5 million per season. So the Kings would clearly have to add an asset to the deal for Philadelphia to be interested, as they are in a rebuild, either a pick or a player, for Philadelphia to really consider it. Plus, don't forget Cal Peterson has a partial no trade clause where he has submitted a list of 10 teams that he can't be traded to. Could Philadelphia be on that list? It's possible. If you don't know, Cal Peterson is not an East Coast guy. So if you're thinking maybe a team like that would be on the list where he could return closer to home, he grew up in Iowa and played college hockey at Notre Dame. So he's a Midwest guy. So the East Coast maybe or maybe not appealing to him. Now, the Kings and Flyers have had some histories of making trades with each other, but I don't see this one happening. I think the Flyers still think Carter Hart is part of their future. I don't see the Kings making Danny Briere an offer he can't refuse. But like I said, anytime there is news of a goalie potentially being moved, that would be of interest to the LA Kings. We'll keep an eye on that, but I don't see that happening. While the LA Kings are searching for their next goalie coach, they could be losing another member of their front office. Mark Bergevin, senior advisor to general manager Rob Blake, is reportedly in the running to be the next GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, before joining the Kings a little over a year ago, Bergevin served as GM of the Montreal Canadiens for close to 10 seasons. He did guide them to a Stanley Cup final in the 2020-21 season. Now, from what I've heard, former Flames general manager Brad Treliving is the leading candidate for that job in Toronto. I was wondering if there had ever been a former Canadian star player or GM that has also been a general manager in Toronto. For you old heads, I did see that Montreal legendary goalie Ken Dryden was GM of the Maple Leafs for 2 years in the late 90s. I did not know that. There's also a GM opening in Pittsburgh. I don't know if Mark Bergevin is interested in that job or if they're interested in him or if he's talked to them about that job or not. But we'll see. I would be very surprised if he got the job in Toronto. And from what I understand, Pittsburgh's looking at former Leafs GM Kyle Dubas. So I don't think Mark Bergevin's going to get either of those jobs, but he is apparently in the running. If not, we could see him return to the Kings as that same role as a senior advisor. But it's worth noting, something I wanted to give you an update on. The World Championships are over, and we will update you on how the remaining Kings players finished up in that tournament. Also, will the Kings be playing south of the border in the near future? That's next. But first, I want to thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. After you listen to this show or watch this show, you should check out Locked On NHL. Can the Dallas Stars win tonight to force a Game 7 back in Vegas, the last team to go down 3-0 and force a Game 7? You might remember the LA Kings back in 2014 on their way to winning the Stanley Cup. Remember, they were down 3-0 against San Jose, won 4 in a row to advance and move on in the first round. Meanwhile, the Florida Panthers are waiting for who their opponent will be. By the way, the Panthers getting a lot of comparisons to the 2012 LA Kings as a team that was higher seed, just kind of squeaked in the playoffs, then reeled off a bunch of road wins onto the Stanley Cup. Keep up to date with all the Stanley Cup playoff action. Again, check out Locked On NHL, your daily show on all things going on in the NHL. That is Locked On NHL, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. So I mentioned the World Championships have wrapped up, and since our last show, the two remaining players that were alive from the LA Kings organization didn't do much in the final two games for the USA, and frankly, the USA wasn't a tough. Was a tough ending for Team USA. They were 7-0 heading into the medal round, and then they lost 2 games in a row. Overtime game to Germany, and then an overtime game to Latvia, and the U.S. finishes in 4th place in that tournament. Ontario Reign captain TJ Tynan did not have a point in either of those 2 overtime losses, but he does finish with a fine tournament. He was 6th overall in the World Championships in scoring with 11 points, 1 goal, and 10 assists. As for the aforementioned Cal Peterson, who, of course, goaltender for the Kings and the Reign, he did not play in either of those final 2 games as well. He finishes his tournament with some great numbers, 3-0, 0.72 goals against average, and a .955 save percentage as the number 2 goalie for the U.S. squad. But again, as I mentioned, those numbers were great, but against much lesser competition. None of the teams that Cal faced made the medal round, and each member of those 3 teams that he defeated, they had a total of 1 NHL player, and that one player is not any kind of a star player. Matter of fact, he's more of an AHL player. So good numbers for TJ Tynan and Cal Peterson in the tournament for the USA. We'll see if maybe TJ Tynan gets a little bit of a shot in training camp because of what he did last year with the Reign as their captain, as their leading scorer, and what he did in this tournament. It would be nice to the Kings to give him at least an opportunity, although it's unlikely that that's going to happen, to be honest with you. He's not really in the future plans of the LA Kings as an older player. And Cal Peterson, we shall see. We'll see if the Kings are able to move him. If not, we'll see if he's able to build off this performance and try and get his career back on track as maybe the number 2 goalie behind Phoenix Copley. We shall see. As far as wrapping up the World Championships and what the other players in the LA Kings organization who took part finished with, Kevin Fiala had 1 goal and 5 assists, joining Switzerland in progress in the tournament. Kings forward Carl Grundstrom had a goal and an assist in 7 games for Sweden. And Ontario Reign forward Martin Kromiak scored the first goal of the entire tournament playing for Slovakia, but he didn't have another point after that in 5 games, and he didn't play in the final 2 games of the tournament. Now, in that 5th game, he only played 33 seconds. I speculated at the time that maybe he had suffered an injury. So I reached out to a Slovakian reporter on Twitter. His name is Martin Tothvano for Sport SK in Slovakia, and asked him if he knew if there was any injury issue with Martin Kromiak. And he responded earlier today, and he said, as far as he knew, the issue with Martin Kromiak and him being basically benched in that Game 5 and not playing in Game 6 and 7 was a coaching decision. So again, as far as he knew, there was not an injury to Martin Kromiak, that it was apparently him falling out of favor with the coaching staff, I guess. odd that they would dress him for a game and only play him 33 seconds and then realize after 33 seconds that we need to bench this guy. But either way, frankly, it's good news. Now, it's not great news for Martin Kromiak to know that he got benched in this tournament, but certainly better news than him getting hurt and that having potentially affecting his offseason and him in rookie camp and things like that. So looks like Martin Kromiak, if the report is true, did not suffer an injury and should be ready to go for training camp. So that's good news. And again, thanks to Martin Tothano for replying to my message on Twitter to him. Speaking of international hockey, heard an interview with David Proper. He is the NHL Senior Executive Vice President of Media and International Strategy. Talked a bit about the LA Kings playing a pair of preseason games coming up in Melbourne, Australia against the Arizona Coyotes this coming September 23rd and 24th. You may or may not know the LA Kings have been very involved in some of these international series over the year. Back in 2007, they played 2 games against the Anaheim Ducks in London in what were the first ever regular season games played overseas. I know at the time I was not happy about this because I did not think it was cool for the NHL to play regular season games outside of North America, especially rivalry games like that. Both the Kings and Ducks lost a home game against their bitter rivals. I wasn't a fan of that at the time. The Kings also played a preseason game in Germany in 2011 against the Hamburg Freezers, which at the time was owned by the Anschutz Entertainment Group, the same group that owns the Kings. The Kings played a pair of preseason games against the Canucks in China, Beijing, and Shanghai back in 2017. And we talked about the Kings being part of this game in Australia. And David Proper talked about one of the likely destinations for a game in the near future is Mexico City. And I know the Kings have had hockey clinics in Mexico City. They had one this past February. I know former King Derek Armstrong late in the season was on the Bally Sports broadcast. They briefly talked about this in an in-between intermission report. I got to think with the LA Kings being a part of a lot of these international games, and of course with the very strong Latino fan base the Kings have, I got to believe an NHL game in Mexico City has got to include the Los Angeles Kings. I would be very, very surprised if that was not the case. Maybe they would play, I don't know, the Dallas Stars or the Arizona Coyotes again. Probably not the Coyotes again since they're playing them. Maybe the San Jose Sharks. Who knows? But again, it seemed apparent by what David Proper was saying that a game in Mexico City is imminent, that it's going to happen in the next couple of years. And like I said, keep an eye out for the LA Kings to be a part of that. I would be very, very surprised if that was not the case. Hey, real quick, I wanted to mention, and thanks to the Kingstorian on Twitter, he is at Kingstorian, Kingstorian. If you don't know, if you're not on Twitter, it's basically an account that puts out this day in Kings history for a specific day. And he did tweet something out that I wanted to mention real quick. And his name is Harry. I've reached out to him, and we're actually scheduled to have him on the show next week. So looking forward to that. But I did want to mention May 29th, 1993, Wayne Gretzky had a hat trick in Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals against Toronto in Maple Leaf Gardens to send the LA Kings to their first ever Stanley Cup final. Gretzky called it the greatest game of his career, which is clearly saying a lot. And I remember that game and that playoff run for me was what really solidified me as an LA Kings fan to get that taste of a deep run in the Stanley Cup playoffs and see the Kings go to the Stanley Cup final. Unfortunately, it didn't end the way we wanted, but that really sold me on playoff hockey and more importantly, sold me on the LA Kings. That was it. That was the start of it. That was the spark for me to become a huge Kings fan, and obviously ended up me hosting a Kings podcast. So just wanted to recognize that date back in 1993, May 29th, Game 7 in Toronto, Wayne Gretzky with a hat trick. I think you can still find that game on YouTube if you want to check it out. If maybe that's something that happened before your time, would recommend it. And hearing the excitement in Bob Miller's voice to know that the LA Kings were finally going for the first time ever to the Stanley Cup final was very, very cool. A great day on this day in Kings history. So for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch this show every day, coming up for the rest of the week, we're still looking for a special interview this week. We're going to try and schedule something for you as we do each week. We are going to do another player breakdown. Phoenix Copley at some point coming up this week. I mentioned earlier that the NHL draft is 30 days away from today. We are going to start looking back at some of the LA Kings recent drafts to grade them and see how those players have panned out. Of course, Friday will be our weekly Kings fan feedback show. You want to send an email for that. The email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com. Again, Friday fan feedback show. Love for you to get those emails in as soon as possible. And as always, you can leave comments on the YouTube episodes as well. Really appreciate that. Helps the show to be found as well when you do that. And would love you to stay interactive with the show on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have yourself a great Memorial Day. We will talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.